The sound of Eleanor Bradford's bare feet hitting the packed earth was drowned out by the thunder of her heartbeat as she fled into the darkness. Her white wedding dress torn and mudded, her carefully arranged auburn hair falling in wild tangles around her shoulders. She had waited until her father and his business associate, the man she was supposed to marry in the morning, had drunk themselves into a stupor before climbing out her bedroom window and running toward the only thing that mattered anymore, which was freedom. The year was 1878, and in Superior, Arizona, women did not have many choices. But Eleanor Bradford had decided she would rather die in the desert than marry a man 3 times her age who looked at her like she was property to be acquired along with her father's copper mining investments. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as she ran through the scrubland, mesquite branches catching at her dress, rocks cutting into her feet. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the life that had been arranged for her without her consent. Her father had made it clear that her opinion did not matter, that at 21 years old she was already becoming an old maid, that Wallace Grimsby was a respectable businessman who would provide well for her. What her father had not mentioned was that Wallace Grimsby had buried 2 wives already, that he had a reputation for cruelty, that the bruises his housekeeper tried to hide were the talk of the women in town who whispered behind their hands. Eleanor had no idea how far she had run when she stumbled and fell, her hands scraping against sharp stones, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her lungs. She lay there for a moment, tasting copper and dust, before she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Terror seized her heart as she scrambled to her feet, certain that her father had discovered her absence and sent men after her. She tried to run again, but her battered feet would not cooperate, and she collapsed against a large boulder, pressing herself into the shadows. The rider slowed and then stopped. Eleanor held her breath, praying to become invisible, but a moment later a deep voice called out, "I can see you there. Are you hurt?" The voice did not belong to any of her father's men. Eleanor remained silent, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The rider dismounted, and in the moonlight she could make out a tall figure leading a horse toward her position. He moved slowly, carefully, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I am not going to hurt you," the man said, his tone gentle but firm, "but you cannot stay out here. There are mountain lions in these hills, and worse." Eleanor knew he was right. She also knew she had no other options. Slowly, she emerged from behind the boulder, and in the pale light she could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps 25 or 26 years old, broad-shouldered and lean, wearing the practical clothes of a working rancher. His face was shadowed by his hat, but his posture suggested concern rather than threat. "Please," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse, "please do not take me back there." The man was silent for a moment, studying her torn wedding dress, her bare feet, her desperate expression. Then he removed his hat, revealing dark hair and serious eyes that held an unexpected kindness. "I am not in the habit of returning people to places they are running from," he said quietly. "Can you ride?" Eleanor nodded, though truthfully she had only ridden a handful of times in her life, always side saddle and always accompanied by a chaperone. The man stepped closer, and she instinctively flinched, but he simply held out his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady as he guided her toward the horse. "My name is Russell Young," he said as he helped her mount. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here. You can rest there tonight, and in the morning you can decide what you want to do." Eleanor wanted to weep with relief, but instead she clenched her jaw and nodded. Russell swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to steady her, and clicked his tongue to set the horse moving at a gentle walk. Eleanor was acutely aware of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in the arm that held her secure. She had never been this close to a man who was not family, and certainly never to one who smelled of leather and sage and honest work. They rode in silence through the darkness, the desert alive with the sounds of night creatures and the whisper of wind through the cacti. Eleanor's adrenaline was fading, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and the beginning awareness of pain in her feet and hands. She found herself leaning back against Russell, her eyes drifting closed despite her best efforts to remain alert. "Stay awake just a little longer," Russell said softly near her ear. "We are almost there." Eleanor forced her eyes open and saw lights in the distance, the outline of buildings becoming clearer as they approached. Russell's ranch was modest but well kept, with a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings arranged around a central yard. A dog barked once and then fell silent as Russell called out a greeting. He dismounted first and then lifted Eleanor down, his hands careful on her waist. Her legs nearly buckled when her damaged feet touched the ground, and Russell caught her easily, his expression tightening with concern as he looked down and saw the blood. "Christ," he muttered, and before Eleanor could protest, he had swept her up into his arms and was carrying her toward the house. "Why did you not say something?" "I did not want to be trouble," Eleanor said faintly, and Russell made a sound that might have been a laugh or an expression of disbelief. "A woman running barefoot through the desert in a wedding dress is already trouble," he said. But there was no judgment in his tone, only a kind of bemused gentleness that made Eleanor's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with solid furniture and a large fireplace that dominated one wall. Russell set Eleanor carefully in a chair and lit several lamps, bathing the room in warm light. Eleanor watched as he moved with efficient purpose, stoking the fire to life, pumping water into a basin, gathering clean cloths and what looked like medical supplies. He knelt before her and gently took one of her feet in his hands, examining the cuts and scrapes with a clinical eye. "This is going to hurt," he warned, and then began cleaning the wounds with careful thoroughness. Eleanor bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, refusing to cry out, and Russell glanced up at her with something like respect in his dark eyes. "You are tougher than you look," he observed, and Eleanor found herself almost smiling despite the pain. "I had to be," she said simply. Russell worked in silence for several minutes, cleaning and bandaging both of her feet and then her scraped palms. When he was finished, he stood and went to a cabinet, returning with a glass of whiskey that he pressed into her hands. "Drink this. It will help with the shock." Eleanor had never tasted whiskey before, but she took an obedient sip and immediately choked on the burning liquid. Russell's lips twitched with suppressed amusement as he patted her back. "Smaller sips," he advised. This time Eleanor managed to swallow without coughing, and the warmth that spread through her chest was not entirely unpleasant. She took another sip and then looked up at Russell, who had settled into a chair across from her, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, "for helping me, for not asking questions." "I have questions," Russell admitted, "but they can wait until morning." He paused, then added, "You are safe here. Whatever you are running from, it does not have permission to cross my property line." Something about the quiet certainty in his voice made Eleanor believe him. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. "I do not even know how to begin to repay you." Russell shook his head. "You do not owe me anything, but I am curious about one thing if you are willing to answer." "What is that?" He gestured toward her torn dress. "Were you supposed to get married today?" "Tomorrow morning," Eleanor corrected, and then the whole story came spilling out, the words tumbling over themselves in her haste to explain. She told him about her father's business dealings, about Wallace Grimsby and his dead wives, about the bruises and the rumors and the cold certainty that if she married him, she would not survive a year. She told him about climbing out the window, about running with no plan and no destination, driven only by the primal need to escape. Russell listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finally fell silent, he was quiet for a long moment before he said, "Your father knows where you went." "I do not think so," Eleanor said. "I left no note. I imagine he will assume I ran toward town or perhaps toward the Wells farm to the east. Mrs. Wells was kind to me once, and my father knows I spoke with her, but not toward my ranch. I did not even know your ranch existed until you found me." Russell nodded slowly, clearly thinking. "They will search for you. A woman does not vanish on the eve of her wedding without causing a stir." "I know." Eleanor's hands tightened on the glass. "I am sorry for bringing this to your door. If you want me to leave in the morning, I will understand." "I do not want you to leave," Russell said, and the quiet firmness in his voice made Eleanor's heart skip. "But I need to know what you want. Not what your father wants, or what society expects, or what anyone else thinks you should do. What do you want, Eleanor?" It was the first time anyone had asked her that question. Eleanor stared at him, this stranger who had appeared out of the darkness and offered her sanctuary without hesitation, and found herself blinking back tears. "I want to be free," she whispered. "I want to make my own choices. I want to live without fear." Russell held her gaze for a long moment, and then he nodded once, decisively. "Then that is what we will figure out how to give you." The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through an unfamiliar window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a confused moment, she could not remember where she was, and then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up carefully, wincing at the soreness in her feet and the various aches throughout her body. She was lying on a bed in what appeared to be a small guest room, covered with a clean quilt. Someone, Russell presumably, had left a basin of water on the dresser along with a towel and what looked like clean clothes. Eleanor rose stiffly and examined the clothing. It was clearly men's attire, trousers and a shirt that would be too large for her, but infinitely more practical than her ruined wedding dress. She washed as best she could, and then dressed, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs and cinching the waist with the provided belt. There was a small mirror on the wall, and Eleanor barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her hair was a tangled mess, her face was sunburned and scratched, and she was wearing trousers like a scandalous frontier woman. She looked absolutely nothing like the proper young lady her father had tried to mold her into. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor thought she looked like herself. She limped into the main room to find Russell standing at the stove, tending to a pan of eggs and bacon with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to cooking for himself. He glanced up as she entered, and his expression shifted, something flickering in his eyes that might have been approval. "Good morning," he said. "How are your feet?" "Sore, but better," Eleanor replied honestly. "Thank you for the clothes. They are old things of mine. I am afraid I do not keep women's clothing on hand." There was a hint of dry humor in his voice that made Eleanor smile despite her nervousness. "These are much better than a torn wedding dress," she assured him. "May I help with breakfast?" Russell hesitated, then gestured toward the coffee pot. "Can you pour coffee without putting weight on those feet?" Eleanor could and did, carefully carrying 2 mugs to the rough-hewn table that dominated the room. Russell brought plates loaded with food, and they sat across from each other in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Eleanor was ravenous, having not eaten since the previous morning, and she focused on her meal with single-minded determination. "When you are finished eating, we need to talk about your situation," Russell said quietly. "Your father will have noticed your absence by now." Eleanor's appetite vanished. She set down her fork and nodded, bracing herself for what she knew was coming. Russell would tell her she could not stay here, that it was not proper, that she needed to return home or go to the authorities or find some respectable woman to take her in. She had known this sanctuary was temporary, but she had not expected it to hurt quite so much to have it confirmed. "I have been thinking about your options," Russell continued, and Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes. "You could go to the sheriff, but that would mean involving the law, and I suspect your father has friends in that office. You could try to reach another town, but traveling alone would be dangerous, and you have no money. You could try to find work here in Superior, but word would get back to your father within days." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "I have no good options. I acted on impulse last night, and now I must face the consequences." "I am not finished," Russell said, and there was something in his tone that made Eleanor look up sharply. "There is another option. You could stay here." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. You could stay here on the ranch. Work for your keep, if that makes you feel better about it. There is plenty to do, and God knows I could use the help." He leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "It would not be without complications. People would talk. Your father would likely come looking for you eventually. But you would be safe here, and you would have time to figure out what you really want to do with your life." "Why would you do this for me?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." Russell was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "5 years ago, my sister ran away from a man our parents wanted her to marry. She did not make it out of town before they caught her and brought her back. She married him because she had no other choice, and 6 months later she was dead. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I saw the fear in her eyes at the funeral, and I know the truth." His jaw tightened. "I was too young then to help her, too caught up in my own life to see what was happening until it was too late. I swore I would never stand by and watch that happen to another woman if I could do something about it." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. "I am so sorry. So am I." Russell shook his head as if clearing away dark memories. "But that is why I am offering this. You deserve the chance my sister never had. The question is, do you want it?" Eleanor thought about her father, about Wallace Grimsby, about the life of quiet desperation that awaited her if she returned. Then she thought about the feeling of running through the desert with nothing but hope and determination driving her forward. She thought about Russell's question from the night before. "What do you want?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I want to stay. I want to work. I want to earn my place here honestly. And I want the chance to figure out who I am when I am not being told who I should be." Something that might have been relief crossed Russell's face. "Then that is settled. But we need to establish some ground rules. This has to look respectable, or at least as respectable as possible given the circumstances. You will have your own room, your own space. You will work as a ranch hand and housekeeper, and I will pay you fair wages. If anyone asks, you are my employee, nothing more." "Of course," Eleanor said quickly, feeling her cheeks heat at the implication. "I would never presume, I know," Russell said gently. "But others will presume plenty, and we need to be prepared for that. This arrangement is not going to be easy, Eleanor. Are you certain you want to do this?" Eleanor thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before nodding. "I am certain." The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and new experiences. Eleanor had never done physical labor before, having been raised to be ornamental rather than useful. But she threw herself into learning with fierce determination. Russell was a patient teacher, showing her how to muck out stalls and feed livestock, how to mend fences and tend the vegetable garden, how to preserve food and manage supplies. Her hands developed blisters that became calluses, her muscles ached in ways she had never experienced, and she had never felt more alive. Russell, she discovered, was a man of few words but consistent kindness. He corrected her mistakes without criticism, praised her successes without condescension, and treated her like a capable human being rather than a fragile ornament. He ran a small but successful cattle operation, managing the work largely by himself with help from a few day workers during busy seasons. His days began before dawn and often stretched late into the evening, and Eleanor found herself matching his rhythm, rising early to prepare breakfast and falling into bed exhausted each night. They developed an easy companionship built on shared work and comfortable silences. Russell would tell her stories about the land as they rode out to check the cattle, pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the territory. Eleanor found herself fascinated by his knowledge and his obvious love for this harsh, beautiful landscape. In turn, she told him about her life before, about growing up in a household where appearances mattered more than happiness, about the books she had read in secret, and the dreams she had never dared speak aloud. "What did you dream about?" Russell asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I used to dream about traveling, seeing the ocean, visiting cities back east, meeting people who talked about ideas instead of gossip. My mother died when I was young, and she used to tell me stories about all the places she wanted to visit someday. After she was gone, I would read everything I could find about the wider world and imagine myself there." "You could still do that," Russell pointed out. "Once you have saved some money, once things settle down, you could go wherever you want." "I could," Eleanor agreed, but the thought did not fill her with the same yearning it once had. Somewhere over the past weeks, this rough ranch house and the silent man beside her had begun to feel like something she had never had before, which was home. It was nearly a month before Eleanor's past caught up with her. She was in the barn cleaning tack when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Russell, who had been working on the roof of one of the outbuildings, came down quickly and met her at the barn door, his expression grim. "Go into the house and stay there," he said quietly. "No matter what you hear, do not come out unless I call for you." Eleanor wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She nodded and hurried toward the house, positioning herself by the window where she could see what was happening without being easily visible. Her heart sank when she recognized her father's tall frame among the group of riders, along with Wallace Grimsby and 3 men she did not know. Russell walked out to meet them, his posture relaxed, but his hand resting casually near the gun at his hip. Eleanor could not hear what was being said, but she could see her father's face growing red with anger as Russell shook his head in response to whatever questions were being asked. The confrontation lasted several tense minutes before Wallace Grimsby dismounted and took a threatening step toward Russell. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists as she watched Russell stand his ground, saying something that made Grimsby stop in his tracks. More words were exchanged, and then her father was dismounting as well, his body language radiating fury. Eleanor could not stand it anymore. Ignoring Russell's instructions, she walked out of the house and down the steps, her chin raised defiantly. "Eleanor," her father's voice cracked like a whip. "Get over here right now." "No," Eleanor said clearly, stopping beside Russell. She could feel him tense beside her, but he said nothing, letting her handle this her own way. "You will return home immediately," her father commanded. "This farce has gone on long enough." You have embarrassed me, embarrassed Mr. Grimsby, made a spectacle of yourself. But we are willing to overlook your hysteria if you come back right now and apologize." "I am not hysterical," Eleanor said steadily. "And I am not coming back. I am an adult woman, Father, and I have the right to make my own choices about my life." Wallace Grimsby spoke up for the first time, his voice oily and unpleasant. "Now, Eleanor, let us not be rash. I am willing to forgive this little episode. You are clearly not thinking clearly, influenced no doubt by this man who has taken advantage of your vulnerable state." "Mr. Young has taken advantage of nothing," Eleanor said sharply. "He has treated me with more respect in 4 weeks than you or my father have shown me in my entire life. I work here honestly and I am paid fair wages for my labor. There is nothing improper about this arrangement." "Nothing improper." Her father's laugh was harsh. "You are living alone with a man, unchaperoned, wearing trousers like a common woman of ill repute. You have destroyed your reputation and ours along with it." "I do not care about reputation," Eleanor said, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. "I care about being able to breathe without fear. I care about being treated like a person instead of property. If reputation requires me to give those things up, then reputation can go to hell." Her father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "How dare you speak to me that way? I am your father and you will obey me." "She is 21 years old," Russell interjected quietly. "Old enough to make her own decisions under the law. She has stated clearly that she does not wish to return with you. I suggest you respect her wishes and leave my property." "Your property?" Grimsby sneered. "This pitiful patch of dirt barely qualifies as a ranch. You think you can stand against men of influence and power. We will have the sheriff out here within the hour." "The sheriff is welcome to visit," Russell said calmly. "He will find a legal employment arrangement and nothing more. Miss Bradford works for wages, has her own quarters, and is here of her own free will. There is no law against any of that." "We will see about that," Eleanor's father snarled. He turned his furious gaze on his daughter. "If you do this, if you refuse to come home, you are no daughter of mine. I will disown you completely. You will get nothing from me, not now and not when I die. Is this really what you want?" Eleanor felt something break inside her chest, but it was not her heart. It was the last chain binding her to her old life. "Yes," she said clearly. "That is exactly what I want." For a moment, her father looked genuinely shocked, as if he had never considered that she might actually choose freedom over security. Then his expression hardened into something cold and cruel. "So be it. You have made your choice, but mark my words, Eleanor, you will regret this. When this man tires of you, when the novelty wears off, and you find yourself alone and ruined, do not come crawling back to me for help." He remounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. Grimsby followed, but not before throwing one last venomous look at Eleanor. "You stupid girl. You have thrown away everything for nothing. You will die alone and forgotten in this wasteland." Then they were gone, horses kicking up dust as they rode away. Eleanor stood frozen, watching them disappear, and tried to understand what she was feeling. It was not regret. It was not even sadness. It was a strange, weightless sensation, like she had been carrying something impossibly heavy for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "Are you all right?" Russell's voice was gentle, concerned. Eleanor turned to look at him and found that she was smiling, tears running down her cheeks. "I am free," she whispered. "I am actually free." Russell's expression softened, and he reached out to brush a tear from her cheek with his thumb, a gesture so tender it made Eleanor's breath catch. "Yes, you are," he said quietly. "The question is, what are you going to do with that freedom?" Eleanor looked around at the ranch, at the mountains in the distance, at the man standing before her who had given her sanctuary without asking for anything in return. "I think I would like to stay here a while longer," she said, "if the offer is still open." "It is always open," Russell said, and something in his tone made Eleanor's heart skip. "For as long as you want it." As the summer heat gave way to the cooler temperatures of autumn, Eleanor found herself settling into life on the ranch with a contentment she had never known before. The work was hard but satisfying, and she took pride in her growing competence. Russell had stopped treating her like a novice and started trusting her with more complex tasks, from helping with difficult calvings to managing the books for the ranch's modest income and expenses. She had also started to notice things about Russell that had nothing to do with his skills as a rancher or his kindness as a person. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which was happening more frequently these days. She noticed the strength in his hands and the gentleness with which he handled injured animals. She noticed the way he always made sure she had eaten before he did, the way he checked on her when she had been working too long in the sun, the way his gaze would sometimes linger on her with an expression she could not quite read. Eleanor told herself these observations meant nothing, that gratitude was not the same as affection, that Russell was simply being kind to an employee. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the sounds of the desert, she found herself thinking about the way his voice rumbled in his chest when he spoke, the rare flash of his smile, the solid warmth of him when they rode together to check on distant sections of the property. She was falling in love with him. She realized one crisp October morning as she watched him work with a young horse in the corral, his voice low and soothing as he gentled the skittish animal. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a kind of giddy joy. This was nothing like what she was supposed to have felt for Wallace Grimsby. This was a feeling that grew from respect and admiration, from shared work and easy companionship, from the safety of being truly seen and valued by another person. The problem was that Eleanor had no idea if Russell felt anything similar. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but he maintained a careful distance, never touching her unnecessarily, never saying anything that could be construed as improper. She understood why, of course. He was protecting her reputation, what little remained of it, and protecting himself from accusations of taking advantage. But it made it impossible to know if the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her was affection, or simply the regard of a good employer for a hard-working employee. "You are thinking too loud," Russell said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, and Eleanor jumped, startled out of her reverie. "I apologize," she said, laughing a little. "I was just wool-gathering. About anything in particular?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to 6 months ago, how different I am." Russell nodded slowly. "You have changed. You are stronger now, more confident. It suits you." "Thank you." Eleanor drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Sometimes I wonder what my mother would think if she could see me now. I do not think she would even recognize me." "Would that be a bad thing?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "I think she would be proud. She always wanted me to be more than what society expected. She just did not live long enough to show me how." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, Russell said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You ever regret it?" "Running away, giving up your old life?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Not even for a moment. Do you know what the worst part of my old life was? It was not the restrictions or the expectations or even the threat of marrying Grimsby. It was the feeling that I did not matter, that my thoughts and feelings and desires were irrelevant, that I existed solely to fulfill other people's plans for me. She turned to look at Russell. Here I matter, the work I do matters, the choices I make matter. How could I regret that? Russell held her gaze for a long moment, and in the dim light she saw something shift in his expression. You matter, he said quietly, intensely. You matter a great deal. Eleanor's heart began to pound. Russell, he shook his head, cutting her off. I should not have said that, forgive me. It was inappropriate. Why? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why is it inappropriate to tell me I matter to you? Because you work for me. Because you came here seeking sanctuary, not to deal with the unwanted attentions of another man. Because you deserve better than to feel obligated to return the sentiments of the person who holds power over your current circumstances. Is that truly what you think? Eleanor asked, something like anger flaring in her chest. That I would feel obligated? Russell, I am not some fragile flower who cannot distinguish between gratitude and genuine feeling. I am not some naive girl who would confuse kindness with something deeper. I know that, Russell said, his voice rough. But I also know that you have been here less than 6 months. You have been through an enormous upheaval. You are still figuring out who you are and what you want. The last thing you need is me complicating matters with feelings that you may not. I am in love with you, Eleanor interrupted, and the words hung in the air between them like something tangible and precious. I have been for weeks now, maybe longer. I did not plan it and I did not want it because I knew it would make everything more complicated. But it happened anyway, and I am tired of pretending it did not. Russell stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like hope. Eleanor, I know all the reasons why this is a bad idea, Eleanor continued, the words rushing out now that she had started. I know people will say you took advantage of me, that I am confusing gratitude with love, that we have not known each other long enough. But I also know that I have never felt this way before. I know that you make me laugh and challenge me to be stronger and look at me like I am capable of anything. I know that, when I think about my future, you are in it, and when you are not there, the whole picture falls apart. She ran out of words finally and sat there breathing hard, her heart hammering in her chest. Russell had not moved, had not said anything, and Eleanor felt the first flicker of doubt. She had misread the situation. He did not feel the same way. She had just ruined everything by confessing feelings he did not want and could not return. Then Russell moved, closing the distance between them in one fluid motion. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with infinite gentleness. Say it again, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. I love you, Eleanor whispered, and then his lips were on hers and she was kissing him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Eleanor melted into his embrace with a sense of rightness that went soul deep. This was where she belonged. This was home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Russell rested his forehead against hers. I have been in love with you since that first night, he confessed. When you told me you wanted to be free, when you looked at me with those fierce eyes and I knew you were someone special. I have been fighting it because I wanted to give you time, to let you figure out what you really wanted without my feelings influencing you. But Eleanor, I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you laugh when you finally master a new skill. I love the way you talk to the horses and the way you look at sunset and the way you are not afraid to get your hands dirty. I love you, and if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Eleanor felt tears spill over, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will have you. Yes to everything. Russell kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter, and Eleanor felt like her heart might burst from the sheer weight of happiness filling her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Russell kept his arms around her, holding her close as they sat together under the stars. "We should probably talk about the practical aspects of this," he said eventually, and Eleanor could hear the smile in his voice. "Must we?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "I was rather enjoying the romantic part." Russell chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. "So was I. But people are already talking about you living here. Once they find out about us, the talk will get worse." "Then we will give them something better to talk about," Eleanor said firmly. "We will get married. Soon. Not because we have to, not to satisfy propriety, but because I want to. Because I want everyone to know that I chose you, that you chose me, that we chose this life together." Russell pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain? After everything you went through to escape one marriage, I do not want you to feel rushed into another." "This is nothing like that," Eleanor said fiercely. "That was a prison sentence. This is freedom. Russell, when you asked me what I wanted, I did not know how to answer, but I know now. I want you. I want this ranch. I want the life we are building together. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to work with you and laugh with you and grow old with you. That is what I want." Russell's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. "Then that is what you will have. We will do this properly, though. I will court you, ask you properly to marry me, give you a ring and a real wedding if you want one." "I do not need a big wedding," Eleanor said. "I do not need fancy or expensive. I just need you." "You have me," Russell promised. "For as long as you want me, you have me." They married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Superior, with the minister's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Russell wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. There was no big celebration, no elaborate reception. Just the two of them and a handful of curious townspeople who had heard about the scandal of Eleanor Bradford running away from her wedding and taking up with a rancher. Eleanor did not care what they thought. All she cared about was the way Russell looked at her when she walked down the short aisle, like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. All she cared about was the steadiness of his voice when he spoke his vows, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the gentle kiss he gave her when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. They rode back to the ranch together as the sun was setting, the sky ablaze with color. Russell lifted her down from the horse and then swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of the house that was now truly their home. Eleanor laughed, her arms around his neck, and kissed him soundly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," Russell said, setting her gently on her feet. "I like the sound of that," Eleanor admitted, "though I will need some time to get used to it." "You have all the time you need," Russell assured her. He reached up to cup her face in his hands, his expression tender. "I love you, Eleanor. I promise to spend every day proving it." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for asking me what I wanted. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose my own life." "Thank you for choosing me," Russell said and kissed her again. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people learning each other with patience and growing passion. Russell was gentle with Eleanor, mindful of her innocence, and Eleanor found that the physical intimacy was nothing like the cold transaction she had been taught to expect. This was warmth and connection, pleasure and trust, two bodies and hearts joining in the most fundamental way possible. Afterward, lying in Russell's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. This was what love was supposed to be, she realized. Not ownership or obligation, but partnership and choice. Not fear, but safety. Not silence, but the comfortable quiet of two people who did not need words to communicate. "What are you thinking?" Russell asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "I am thinking that I am exactly where I am supposed to be," Eleanor said. "I am thinking that running away from my wedding was the best decision I ever made." Russell's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "I cannot argue with that." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Eleanor was no longer just a ranch hand, but Russell's full partner in running the property. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life together one day at a time. It was not always easy. The work was hard, money was sometimes tight, and the Arizona territory could be harsh and unforgiving. But they faced every challenge together, and that made all the difference. As winter approached, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Russell one cold December morning as they were having breakfast, and watched his face transform with joy. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, murmuring words of love and wonder against her hair. "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "I am happier than I have any right to be," Russell said. "You have given me everything, Eleanor. A home, a life, and now this. How could I be anything but happy?" The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor continued to work as much as she could. But as the months passed and her belly grew, Russell became increasingly protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work in the hot sun for too long. He fussed over her meals and made sure she rested, hovering like a worried mother hen until Eleanor finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I am worried," Russell admitted. "I lost my sister, and the thought of anything happening to you—" "Nothing is going to happen to me," Eleanor said firmly, taking his hands. "I am healthy and strong. The midwife says everything is progressing normally. You cannot protect me from everything, Russell. All you can do is trust that we will face whatever comes together." Russell nodded, but Eleanor could still see the worry in his eyes. She understood it, though. He had lost so much already. The thought of losing her terrified him. So she made sure to reassure him daily, to show him through her actions and her words that she was not going anywhere, that they were building something lasting and strong. The baby came in early July of 1879, on a day so hot that Eleanor thought she might melt. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eleanor understood Russell's fear, when she wondered if she would survive this. But Russell stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and talking her through the contractions, his presence an anchor in the storm of pain and effort. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Eleanor wept with relief and joy. Russell cut the cord with shaking hands and then cradled his son with a wonder that brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. "We have a son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, we have a son." They named him Thomas after Russell's father, and he was the light of their lives. Russell proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle despite his obvious terror of doing something wrong. Eleanor loved watching him with the baby, the way his hard edges softened when he held Thomas, the way he would sing old cowboy songs in his rough voice to soothe the infant to sleep. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Russell had made several shrewd deals that increased their herd, and Eleanor's management of the household finances meant they were able to save money for the first time. They hired a full-time ranch hand to help with the work, a grizzled older man named Pete who had a gift with horses and a kind heart. Eleanor sometimes thought about her old life, about the woman she had been before she ran into the desert that night. That Eleanor seemed like a stranger now, a pale shadow of the woman she had become. She was stronger now, both physically and mentally. Her hands were calloused, her face was tanned from the sun, and she could rope a steer, break a horse, and deliver a calf without hesitation. She was a rancher, a wife, a mother. She was free. One afternoon, when Thomas was nearly 2 years old, Eleanor was in town buying supplies when she saw a familiar figure emerging from the bank. Her father had aged in the years since she had last seen him, his hair gone gray, his face lined with care. For a moment, their eyes met across the dusty street, and Eleanor braced herself for anger or recriminations. Instead, her father simply looked at her for a long moment, taking in her practical clothing, the baby on her hip, the quiet confidence in her bearing. Then he nodded once, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or even respect, and turned away. Eleanor watched him go and felt the last lingering hurt from their estrangement fade away. She did not need his approval or his blessing. She had built a good life without him, and that was enough. That evening, she told Russell about the encounter as they sat on the porch watching Thomas play in the yard with the dogs. Russell listened quietly and then asked, "How do you feel about it?" "At peace," Eleanor said honestly. "I do not hate him anymore. I do not really feel anything about him except maybe a distant sadness for what could have been. But I do not need him in my life to be happy. I have everything I need right here." Russell pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, and watched their son toddle across the yard, laughing as the dogs jumped around him. The years passed in a blur of seasons and hard work and quiet joy. Eleanor and Russell added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Caroline when Thomas was 4, and another son they named Jacob 2 years after that. The ranch grew along with their family, becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Eleanor never forgot that first night when Russell had found her in the desert and asked her what she wanted. She had spent her whole life being told what to want, what to be, how to act. But Russell had given her the space to figure it out for herself, to become the person she was meant to be. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, which was the freedom to choose him, to choose their life together, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Russell surprised her with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal with her initials stamped on the cover. "For your thoughts," he said, "for the stories you want to tell, for whatever you want to put in it." Eleanor opened the journal and saw that Russell had written an inscription on the first page. For Eleanor, who had the courage to run toward her future and the wisdom to know it when she found it. "All my love, always." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes as she looked up at her husband, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for this, for our life, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Russell said, pulling her into his arms. "Thank you for choosing me." "Every day," Eleanor promised. "I choose you every day." They stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert, their children playing nearby, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening surrounding them. Eleanor thought about the terrified woman who had run into the darkness 10 years ago and the confident woman she had become. She thought about all the choices that had led her here, to this moment, to this life, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. As the children grew older, Eleanor began to write. She filled the journal Russell had given her, and then another, and another. She wrote about the ranch, about the territory, about the people she met and the life she lived. She wrote about courage and freedom, and the power of choosing your own path. Some of her stories were published in Eastern magazines under a pen name, bringing in additional income and a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with keeping house or raising children. Russell supported her writing the same way he supported everything about her, with quiet pride and unwavering encouragement. He would take over her ranch duties on days when the words were flowing, and he would read her stories with the same serious attention he gave to cattle prices and weather patterns. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. He would follow Russell everywhere, learning the business from the ground up, and Russell taught him with the same patient thoroughness he had once taught Eleanor. Caroline was bright and fierce, with her mother's determination and her father's steady temperament. Jacob was the family's wild card, always getting into mischief, always laughing, keeping everyone on their toes. Eleanor loved watching Russell with their children, seeing the way he parented them with gentle firmness and obvious affection. He taught the boys to respect women and the land in equal measure. He taught Caroline that she could do anything her brothers could do, that her gender did not define her limits. He taught all of them that kindness and hard work were the foundations of a good life. On quiet nights when the children were asleep, Eleanor and Russell would sit together on the porch, and sometimes Eleanor would think about how close she had come to a completely different life. If she had not found the courage to run, if Russell had not found her in the desert, if he had not asked her that simple question, "What do you want?" But she had run, and he had found her, and he had asked. And in asking, he had given her permission to want something for herself, to claim her own life. That gift was more precious than gold, more valuable than any amount of security or respectability. "What are you thinking about?" Russell would ask, as he always did when he saw her lost in thought. "About how lucky I am," Eleanor would answer, and it was always true. Years turned into decades. The children grew up and made their own choices. Thomas took over running the ranch, bringing his wife to live there and starting the next generation of youngs. Caroline became a teacher in town, educating the children of miners and ranchers with patience and passion. Jacob, restless like his mother had once been, went east to see the world, sending letters full of adventures and promises to return. Eleanor and Russell grew older together, their bodies wearing the marks of a life of hard work, their faces lined with years of laughter and love. They moved into a smaller house on the property, letting Thomas and his family have the main house, but they remained active in the ranch operations, sharing the wisdom of their decades of experience. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party that brought together half the territory. People came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend, the woman who had run from an arranged marriage and the man who had given her sanctuary, and then his heart. At one point in the evening, Eleanor found herself standing apart from the crowd, watching the celebration with quiet contentment. Russell came to stand beside her, taking her hand in his, and they stood together as they had done thousands of times before. "Any regrets?" Russell asked, and Eleanor knew he was thinking about that first question he had asked her, about what she wanted. "Not a single one," Eleanor said firmly. "You." "Only that I did not find you sooner," Russell said, lifting her hand to his lips. "But I am grateful for every day I have had with you." "We still have plenty of days left," Eleanor pointed out. "We are not done yet." "No," Russell agreed, smiling. "We are not done yet." They grew old together in the way that people who truly love each other do. Their lives so intertwined that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. When Russell's health began to fail in his late 60s, Eleanor cared for him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her. When he died peacefully in his sleep at 72, with Eleanor holding his hand, she grieved deeply but without regret. They had built a good life together. They had loved well and raised a family, and left a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Eleanor lived another 5 years after Russell's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She spent her final years writing her memoirs, wanting to leave her children and grandchildren the full story of how their family came to be. She wrote about running into the desert, about Russell finding her, about the question that had changed everything. She wrote about love and freedom and the courage it takes to choose your own life. On the last page of her memoirs, she wrote, "If I could go back and give advice to that terrified girl running through the darkness, I would tell her this: you are braver than you know. The fear you feel right now will not last forever. There is a man waiting in the darkness who will see you, really see you, and ask you the most important question anyone has ever asked you. And when you answer, when you claim what you want for yourself, you will find that freedom and love are not opposites but partners. You will find that choosing your own path does not mean walking alone. You will find that home is not a place but a person, and happiness is built one choice at a time. Run, Eleanor. Run toward your future. It is more beautiful than you can imagine." Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77 in the house she had helped build, on the land she had learned to love, surrounded by the family she and Russell had created together. Thomas found her manuscript on her bedside table, and he published it the following year under her real name. It became a small sensation. This memoir of a woman who had dared to run from the life others planned for her, and in doing so had found everything she had never known she wanted. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and then his children's after him. They kept Eleanor's journal and Russell's old hat in a place of honor in the main house, reminders of the couple who had started it all. They told stories about Eleanor and Russell to their children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of a love that had begun with a simple question and lasted a lifetime. And on quiet nights when the desert wind whispered through the mesquite, when the stars blazed overhead in the vast Arizona sky, you could almost hear it, carried on the breeze, a man's voice asking the question that changed everything. "What do you want?" And a woman's answer, clear and certain and free, "I want to live, I want to choose, I want to love, I want everything." And she got it, every bit of it. Because she had the courage to run into the darkness, and because there was a man waiting there who saw her not as property or obligation, but as a person deserving of choice and freedom and love. Together they had built something lasting, something real, something that echoed through generations. That was their legacy. Not just the ranch or the family or the stories, but the simple truth that everyone deserves to be asked what they want, and that the answer to that question, honestly given and bravely pursued, can change everything. Eleanor Bradford Young had run from an arranged marriage into an uncertain future, and she had found exactly what she needed. A rancher who hid her, who asked her what she wanted, who gave her the space to figure out the answer, and who loved her for exactly who she was. It was more than enough. It was everything. Their story lived on long after they were gone, passed down through generations as a reminder that love is a choice. Freedom is worth fighting for, and sometimes the best things in life begin with a single question and the courage to answer it honestly.